interrupt, just saying hi. I think it's working. Oh yeah. I'll let you find out. I'm recording it.
Good?
Good morning, friends. I'm going to invite you to take a seat. The Lord be with you. That's how you get Episcopalians to pay attention. So we are really grateful for your attendance today, and we hope you can be here in the subsequent weeks. If you have not registered, please give your name. Do we have a list over there? Peggy will take it, and we can get you materials if you don't already have them. We do ask that couples share a copy of the book, I think is what we decided. So this is a prayer that we're going to do to open us, and it's in your binders, but don't look at it now. It's a lovely sort of blessing about death from John O'Donoghue's book called To Bless the Space Between Us. From the moment you were born, your death has walked beside you. Though it seldom shows its face, you still feel its empty touch when fear invades your life, or what you love is lost, or inner damage is incurred. Yet when destiny draws you into these spaces of poverty and your heart stays generous until some door opens into the light, you are quietly befriending your death, so that you will have no need to fear when your time comes to turn and leave. That the silent presence of your death would call your life to attention, wake you up to how scarce your time is, and to the urgency to become free and equal to the call of your destiny. That you would gather yourself and decide carefully how you now can live the life you would love to look back on from your deathbed. Amen. Here is Jackie Thompson.
Thank you, Anne. And that's my water bottle, so there is a seat available there. I was looking for it earlier. So I want to thank you all for coming. We're here today to talk about death, and even for a resurrection people, talking about death is difficult. I think that is one thing every person in this room could agree on. We may not agree on anything else 100%, but we all agree we're all going to die. Okay, I was wrong. So what I would invite you to do now is to take a few minutes and to think about your time of death. If you're able to have some control over the circumstances, what will it look like? Where will you be? Who will be there? How will you be feeling? Physically, emotionally, spiritually? So just take a couple of minutes to think that through, and then if you're comfortable sharing with someone next to you, I invite you to do that. You can share with someone you know, perhaps someone you live with, or someone you don't know as well.
Well, I'm taking that on. Sure, I'd like to hear it. Where I'd rather be at home than I'd like to have a window with birds. And how? Not drawn out. It's like if I have pictures, what I'd like. How would I feel? Comfortable, slack, not stressed, not painful, not an angry feeling. Oh, okay. Okay.
I just hope I'm not in a place that's dark or cold.
Oh, gosh.
And noisy, no noise.
Dark, cold, for me.
No motorcycle noises.
Don't want
Light, warm, yes. We don't know.
It's like a window. Or they do the hospice care. But I prefer it at home.
Have you designated,
Oh, yeah, that's all done.
special needs will,
Yeah, I
and
think
expression?
yeah, nothing's a surprise here.
Like somebody.
I'm sorry to butt in at this point. Unfortunately, we're trying to fit a lot into a short amount of time. So I hope you'll continue these thoughts and these conversations as you go forward. But right now, I'm going to move us along a little bit. There's no right answer to this question. There are some people who want to die in a hospital. There are some who want to die at home. One of the reasons I was uber cautious during COVID was I was clear I didn't want to die in a hospital alone connected to a ventilator. But some people do want to die in the hospital. My neighbor Miriam had breast cancer, and at age 60 she was dying. And she knew she wanted to die at home. She also knew she wanted to die in the evening. She was always concerned about her appearance. And she didn't want the neighbors to see them taking her body out of the house. So she had a dinner with her husband and her 2 daughters. She gave her jewelry, distributed that among her 2 daughters, and she died. And her body was out of the house before the neighbors could see in the morning. So sometimes we get to have some control over that, sometimes it's just out of our control. I'm going this morning to introduce you to Hank Dunn. And he is the author of the little book that's in your packet. This is a book we're asking you to share if you're a couple. And it's a book you didn't get if you didn't register. Are we going to try to order more, Ann?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
We are.
It is, if you know anyone else who wants one, they're readily available on Amazon. Hank has been a hospice chaplain for about 4 decades, both in the hospital and in hospice facilities. And then hospice will send chaplains to your home when you're under hospice care. He's done that as well. We tried to get him to come and speak here, but unfortunately he's moved to Mississippi. So that was a little harder. But I first got to know Frank when he came to St. Anne's, and we did, my former parish, where we did a series similar to this there. My one regret was that I had not met Hank Dunn sooner. before I really needed to have what he had to say in my heart and in my head. The women in my family have lived well into their 80s. So while we're never prepared for that middle of the night phone call, I really wasn't prepared when my mom was 65. The phone rang in the middle of the night, and it was my dad on the other end saying, Mom's had a cardiac arrest. I had just talked with her that evening. Thank God I had talked with her. I had a joke that she liked. She always laughed at my jokes. What's Irish and stays out all winter? Patio furniture. She had a good day. She washed her windows. She loved to clean. I didn't inherit that gene, but it was fun for her. And she had made chocolate mousse that she and my dad were eating when I called. So this phone call I did not expect. I didn't know until my dad continued talking whether she was still living or not. She was in a coma, he told me, and the next 24 hours would be critical. If she regained consciousness in that time, there was a chance for a good outcome. If she didn't, the chance for a good outcome was really pretty slim. I flew to Boston that morning and was back and forth for the next 3 weeks. My son was graduating from high school, I had 3 other children at home, and I just couldn't be there the whole time. It was my first time in an intensive care unit. It was before I was ordained, before I had done clinical pastoral education. And so a family friend had picked me up at the airport and dropped me at the hospital. And I faced the doors of the intensive care unit as the associate rector of my parents' church was coming out. And she said, I've been reading Psalms to your mom and praying for a holy and peaceful death. And I said, that's not my prayer. My prayer is that she will recover. So God bless her, she went back in with me and we prayed. Pretty soon the staff of the hospital started asking my dad and me if we didn't want to sign a DNR order, a do not resuscitate order. I had never heard of what that was. They explained it. It felt to me like it was giving up hope on my mom because I was still holding out for that miracle. And I thought because she was only 65, we had another 20 years together. So my dad and I continued to wrestle with this decision. We talked to his rector who came into the hospital and did a really good job of reflecting back what we were saying. Oh, so you're wondering what to do, you're having a hard time with us. And a really good job of not telling us what to do. When I was back here, I talked to my rector, Bob Denick, whose mom had died under similar circumstances the year before. And he said, you know, Jackie, it's really just all that medical machinery that's keeping your mom alive. So as time passed, my dad and I got a little more comfortable with it, with signing that DNR order. But the question that kept haunting us was, we really don't know what Mom would have wanted. He said, we never talked about it. My sister came from Germany, and Hank Dunn makes a generalization that the further away a loved one is, either emotionally or geographically, the harder it is for them to let go. So my sister was having a hard time with the DNR order. My dad and I at one point went in to talk to their primary care physician who had been seeing my mom in the hospital. And he looked at us and he said, you're not visiting your wife, you're not visiting your mother, you're having an extended wake. I didn't like him very much, and I still wouldn't give him good grades for bedside manner. But he did say probably what I needed to hear, and he said it probably in a way I needed to hear it. He then went on to say that when you call 911, if they arrive within 4 minutes, you say, thank God. If it's longer than 4 minutes, you say, God help us. And it had been longer than 4 minutes for my mom. During that 3-week period, my dad said, this has been so hard, I want to be sure you don't have to go through this again. So even with all that was going on in that period, he went to his lawyer and he signed his advance medical directive, and he made it clear to me he did not want to be on a ventilator, and he would be very happy for me to sign a DNR order. Even in the midst of those very difficult 3 weeks, I came to see that they were a gift. They were a chance to say goodbye to my mom, not in the way I would have wanted, because I would have liked for her to be able to talk to me as well. But I could let her know how much I loved her, what a great mom she'd been, what an outstanding grandmother she'd been. It gave me a chance to get used to the idea of letting go. And it also gave me the chance to see that death in this case, was not going to be the worst outcome. For her to live in a permanent vegetative state would have been the worst outcome. After her funeral, as we drove into the cemetery, I remember thinking, this is what death with dignity means. We've just come from a full church where we've celebrated her life. And it's not at the end of a long period of time where we've been visiting someone in a comatose state and saying, this is a release. 14 years later, my dad was in the hospital. I didn't think it was anything serious, but he had a hospital-borne staph infection. As I was sitting there with him one day, I said, Dad, it looks to me like you're having trouble breathing, is that right? And he said, yeah, it is. I said, okay, let me get the nurse. And she said, we're putting him on a ventilator. So before I could think to say, please give us 2 minutes to talk to him, or to say, you know, he really didn't want to be on a ventilator, is this just a temporary measure to see if he can get it through this time? He was on the ventilator. And within 2 days, they were asking us to sign a do not resuscitate order. By this time, he had remarried, so it wasn't totally my decision. Actually, it wasn't legally my decision. But his wife and I were on the same page with it, and we were very clear this is what he would have wanted. Never an easy decision, but at least it helped being clear what he wanted. So I share this story as an example of how helpful it can be to have articulated with those we love what we do and don't want to have done.
Can you back up and tell us what happened to your dad?
Oh, he died. Yeah, but it was a peaceful death. We were surrounded. He was surrounded by us. At that point, I was ordained, so I was much more comfortable with all this ICU stuff. We'd had Eucharist with him the night before, and yeah, unfortunately, he couldn't talk to us, but it was a much more settled feeling, I think, for all of us. So thank you for asking. He'd be 99 if he had survived. So again, these stories are just, for me, an example of why it's very helpful for us to have talked about it, to thought about what we want, and to have communicated that to those who might be making the decisions for us, to talk it over with them. So all of this information that I'm about to get into is covered by Hank in his book. You probably don't need to take notes. And I need to say I'm not a doctor. I've never even played one on TV. Anne maybe has.
Yes, I have. And the brain surgery went very well.
On your brain. I was surprised to learn, I probably shouldn't have been, that ours is the first generation to have to face these decisions. And it's thanks to the modern life-prolonging medical developments, such as ventilators, feeding tubes, and CPR. And I'm not great at writing stuff on an easel, but if it helps you to see it. These are some of the things that help prolong our life. There are 4 common decisions we might need to make for ourselves if we're conscious, or we might need to make for a loved one if they're not. One is whether to attempt resuscitation or not. The other is whether to give them artificial nutrition and hydration, i.e. a feeding tube. Another is whether to move them from their home or their facility to a hospital or treatment facility. And the 4th one, which Hank says we really should consider first, and I agree, is what is the treatment goal? Is the treatment goal to cure the illness, or is it at this point to make the person comfortable? What makes these decisions for us so hard is not the medical or the moral or the ethical side. That wasn't what I was wrestling with my mom. It's the emotional and the spiritual side. CPR is one of the things that can prolong life. It was developed in the 1960s. I was surprised to learn it was that recently. And it was designed to rescue victims of sudden death. So you think of drownings, you think of electric shock, and you think of someone who's had a heart attack who's otherwise been healthy. It's not indicated in the case of terminal illness. But what we need to remember is that when you're in a hospital and when you call 911, they're trained to sustain life, whatever they have to do. So when a code's called in a hospital, All the medical personnel respond, they have a cart, and the treatment may include CPR, it may include electric shock, it may include medications they inject, or it may include a ventilator, or all of the above. Of the people who are resuscitated in the hospital, only 17% survive. And those who have the lowest chance for survival are those who have 2 or more serious medical conditions, those who are dependent on other people for their care, and those who have a terminal illness. So why not try CPR? What are some of the downsides? You have to put a lot of pressure when you perform CPR. If you haven't had the training, I recommend you do it, and I need to update mine. So broken ribs are very common, especially in older people who tend to be frail. If you've been too long without oxygen, there can be brain damage, and that can be anything, can range from slight to ending up in a permanent vegetative state. So once 911 is called, once CPR is started, it sets a process in motion that's hard to stop. Patient could end up on a ventilator. My dad was in the hospital, he didn't want to be on a ventilator, but he ended up on a ventilator, even when the patient doesn't want that. It also reduces the chance for a peaceful death. So when a patient enters a hospital or any care facility, they're going to use all the life-saving measures they have in their bandwidth to try to sustain life, unless the doctor leaves an order in writing for do not resuscitate. And these are some of the the orders. Do not resuscitate, do not attempt to resuscitate is DNAR. The one that is my favorite is AMD. I thought it was new because they started using it at Fairfax Hospital while I was volunteering as a chaplain. That means allowing natural death. And just the wording of that is so much more comforting for me than pulling the plug or disconnecting from the ventilator. Cassandra, did you have a?
Yeah, my father-in-law, so my husband's father, he had suffered from Alzheimer's for 10 years. He had fallen. He was on that very low end of survival. And as smart as my brother-in-law and my husband were, they didn't realize that CPR is part of extraordinary measures. So they had to put in place the DNR, and my father-in-law needed CPR, and they did it, so they just extended his suffering completely inadvertently, and that was an important lesson that we learned.
Thank you. Yeah, so she's talking about no DNR order, so CPR was started on someone at the end stages of dementia. The other things that you can sign are no code or no CPR. So that would have covered your father-in-law. And the order, I just need to emphasize, it has to be given by the physician, and it has to be in writing. Usually the physician will do that in consultation with the family.
Jackie,
Yeah.
can I say one
Oh,
thing
please,
also?
yes.
Oh,
Thank you.
Sorry. So my mother had a series of fainting spells, and if you call 911 and you do not have your DNR to put in front of their face, they are automatically going to do things. And then once you get in the hospital, then the system. So if you've got to have it on your refrigerator, you've got to have it in several places. You know, you'll want to work on it with your lawyer or whatever. Yep, everywhere.
Yes, right.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Is it on the patient's chart?
I believe
Will it
it
be
is.
obvious to the medical
if
personnel?
the doctor has
If
signed
the
it.
doctor has signed it, I believe it is. But then Anne makes the point too, if you're at home, it's good to have it on your refrigerator and other places. I think that's where paramedics look, is on the refrigerator. Yeah.
Recently, I've taken the suggestion that in my wallet, I put the words, if found, please call this number.
Ah,
And what I'm thinking now at this table is, I could put something in the wallet, I think a lawyer has to answer this, that says, if unconscious, please allow natural death. I'm wondering if that card found on the victim's person has any credibility with the medical community.
you know, we're gonna have a lawyer here next week and he could
Okay.
perhaps answer that question. I don't know, but it sounds like a good idea to me.
I just want to say that I think we need to check with each state because state rules are different. We took my sister a long time ago to have brain surgery in Arizona. She had a do not resuscitate. She said to me, so my brother-in-law was there, her husband was there, I was there, and she was very clear with me. Lisa, here's my DNR, do not resuscitate. I said to my brother-in-law, she has this, we gave it to the hospital. In Arizona, the spouse can overrule a do not resuscitate. So when she didn't come out of the surgery properly and she was put on a ventilator, my brother-in-law, she was young, they were only, they weren't even 50, right? She wasn't even 50, so she was in her 40s. My brother-in-law froze and said, no, I want you to try and bring her back. So, and Arizona, and they followed that because that's the law in Arizona. So I just think we need to also think about the state that we're in.
Good point. Okay, I want to try to move us along unless anyone has something pressing. I want to talk next about artificial hydration and nutrition. So I need Vanna White. So if a patient can no longer take liquid or food by mouth, the decision needs to be made whether to offer them artificial nutrition or artificial hydration. And there are 4 ways to deal with the nutrition. One is the nasogastric tube, also called the NG tube, that goes through the nose, down the esophagus, into the stomach. Then there's the gastronomy tube, and probably the nurses and doctors here can correct my pronunciation. It's called a PEG or G tube. That's inserted surgically through the skin into the stomach wall. There are also tubes that bypass the stomach. There's a J tube that's inserted directly into the small intestine. And there's a PTM, and that's less common. That's a catheter or needle that goes in directly into the vein, often into the chest. And it pumps the nutrients into the bloodstream, bypassing the digestive system. What are the benefits of artificial nutrition? They can be good for patients like a stroke victim who's lost the ability to swallow. They think for a temporary time. The downsides are for non-responsive patients. They may never regain their ability to eat or drink. Do you remember the name Karen Ann Quinlan?
Oh, yeah.
10 years she was on a feeding tube, and there was a legal battle over that time. I believe it was between her husband and her parents about whether to stop feeding her. I did not recognize the name Rita Green. She had a similar situation for 48 years. She made no response to any outside stimuli during that time. So that's one of the downsides of artificial nutrition. Often it's,
Excuse me,
Oh,
how,
hang on. For the report.
so it was between the parents and the husband. Clearly, the husband, I would think, has the full rights. How do you avoid that problem? Is it in the DNR?
That's a good question, and probably an attorney or medical person could answer it. I can't. But when you go see your attorney to do your end-of-life desires, that would be a good thing to ask. And that might have been in Arizona too.
Florida.
Florida.
And it was a court case.
Yes.
Anyone can take a case to court, and they got an injunction from a correct judge on that.
Okay, thank you. So often this artificial nutrition, it involves a younger patient. They've been in an accident, either a car accident or a sporting accident. It's a time when the CPR has been successful. The blood supply was interrupted, but the organs are still working okay. So a couple of the risks of this are pneumonia. It can be a problem if the tube is displaced or if the patient vomits and that gets into their lungs. Ulcers and infections are also a concern, and often the patient will need to be either restrained or sedated if they're trying to pull the tubes out. Bed sores and stiff limbs are also a concern. And another downside is it increases the isolation. If the patient's able to take some nutrition and there can be careful feeding, that puts someone in front of them, interacting with them 3 times a day that isn't there if they're on the artificial nutrition. I'm just going to talk mainly about the downsides of using artificial hydration in a dying patient. We know our bodies can live for a lot longer without food than they can without water. But in a dying patient, hydrating them isn't always a good idea. And the reason is, if there's less fluid in the lungs, there's less congestion, and so the breathing is easier. If there's less fluid in the throat, they don't have to suction as often. If they have tumors and the liquid fluid is reduced, there's less pain around the tumors. If you have less water in you, you don't have to pee as often, so they don't have to move the patient as often to change them. And if there's less fluid in your hands or your feet or your body, when the body's shutting down, this buildup can be uncomfortable. And a natural pain-relieving chemical is released as the body dehydrates. That often gives the patient a sense of well-being, something they call mild euphoria. People ask if dehydration causes pain. At the end of a terminal illness, it's a natural and compassionate way to die. You often have a dry mouth or a sense of being thirsty, and that can be treated with mouth care and with ice strips, those swabs they put in your mouth. And in my 5 wishes, I have that I want lip balm from the Body Shop on my lips. As with the ventilator, withdrawing the feeding tube can be a harder decision than starting it in the first place. So Hank Dowd spends some time talking about dementia patients in his little book, and he says one of the symptoms of the end stage of dementia is difficulty swallowing. So many healthcare professionals believe careful hand feeding at this stage is better than artificial feeding. 2 different physician professional societies independently concluded that the use of feeding tubes is the #1 treatment to avoid in advanced dementia patients. It's a hard decision because we're trained, we're enculturated to feed people. From the moment a baby's born, we want to feed that baby. People come to our home, we want to feed them. So it's hard to say we're going to withhold nutrition. I'm going to just move us along quickly because I want Norma to have a chance to talk about the 5 wishes.
Jackie, we got started a little bit late, so we can go a little bit longer.
Okay.
Okay, but yeah.
All right, let me pause then and see if anyone has questions about the feeding tube and the hydration that I probably can't answer. We tried to have a medical person come, and just with summer schedules, that wasn't possible. So we can follow up later if there's an interest. Okay, I want to go on to talk about palliative care versus hospice care. Yeah, oh, you can flip it. Thank you, Vanna. Vanna Lincoln. Hank makes the point that everyone can receive palliative care, and that's to give you relief from pain. So even if you're pursuing a cure to your illness, you're entitled to be as comfortable as they can make you. Hospice care is for those who have decided they want comfort, but they're no longer seeking treatment for a cure. And hospice comes from the root word hospitality. Hospitality means a place of shelter and rest for the weary and the sick travelers at the end of a long journey. That applies to us at the end of the long journey of our life. The focus under hospice care is on quality of life versus length of life. It offers grief support, importantly, for the patient and for their loved ones and it continues following the death. The benefits of hospice care for the patients and for the loved ones increase if you enter hospice care sooner rather than later. I love that Jimmy Carter set that example for us. I forget what month it was he announced he was going under hospice care, but I expected we'd hear maybe within a few weeks or a month that he had died, and he's still with us. Yeah. And he said he was entering hospice care so he could get the care he needed and benefit from hospice. Often people start to feel better when they enter hospice care. It's a good time to think about your goal for your death. I don't know how many of you, when we began the session, said you wanted to die in hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't want to
Okay.
pass in our sleep.
Yes, I would too, yeah. I did a service at my first parish at a nursing home, and a woman who went with me would stop at the door and she'd say, "Please God, just give me a good heart attack." Because we didn't want to end up as those patients in a nursing home. So Hank's big takeaway for me is that dying in the intensive care unit hooked up to machines and tubes is the accident. A peaceful death in your own bed takes planning. So that's what I'm taking away from his book with me. And I've just really skimmed the surface. It's all in his book and more. He has some good examples from patients he visited of various decisions and how they panned out. Any questions, any comments before Norma leads us through the 5 wishes, which will help you make sure you, or take steps to make sure you have the kind of death you hope for.
Just one other word about hospice. Generally, I tried to get my mother into hospice. She had terrible dementia too soon. So they like to have a sense that there will be 6 months about till the death. So the first time she got evaluated, she didn't pass. And then this situation where she fainted, they called 911, she ended up in a Tucson hospital on the other side of the country from me. I couldn't get anybody on the phone. They were doing all kinds of tests on her because I couldn't get them to stop and I wasn't there. So the person who was handling her in the assisted living said to me the next day, "Let's have her evaluated for hospice again." And this time she passed. And that what changed is that when she fainted, hospice was called, not 911. And it was a completely different outcome. So I just think hospice is our friend in a way that we really need to wrap our brains around.
And I don't know that the 6-month rule applies each hospice is a little different. Hank Dunn said he would ask the surprise question, and that was, will I be surprised if this patient dies within the year? So in the hospice he worked with, it was a little longer period of time, and I think they varied a little bit. Okay, Norma. Oh, yes.
I just wanted to share that I agree hospice was helpful and I did to get my husband home, but it's not going to be enough care. And they only deal with the hospice, but they're not going to have 24/7, so you're going to have to, ahead of time, look for care in addition to the hospice. And you're doing this as a caregiver, so it's an extremely hard thing to do. But the hospice will not be 24/7.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's Adrian.
Adrian?
I just add to that, my mother-in-law was at Sunrise, and they got hospice care for her at Sunrise. 6 months there was no time issue. And so if your loved one is in a home, it's worth checking to see if they can do that, because what that meant for the Sunrise was they got an extra nurse to come around, and Social Security paid for it. So it's worth exploring that, because
I'd like to add to that, hospice is covered by Medicare.
Yes.
So you don't have to worry about the expense. That is huge.
Okay, thank you. Sorry we're rushing you along.
Can
know
you
that we're gonna
put
go
the
over
mic
the-
closer to your mouth, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Now can you hear me better?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great. Before I start on the 5 Wishes document, I just want to briefly tell you my story. During Lent of 2011, so that was 12 years ago, here at Holy Comforter, we did have a 6-part program covering more or less the same topics we are having now. And it was based on, in good part, on the 2009 initiative of the Diocese of Virginia called Are Your Affairs in Order? And this 64-page document is still accessible on the diocesan website. And in your packet of materials, there's the link that you can use to go there. So at that time, my husband had recently been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, and he died 3 years later. And our primary focus during the 3 years, of course, was dealing with his dementia. But because we had participated in this program, and we were better prepared to talk about and eventually deal with the end-of-life issues when that time came. So after taking that 6-week program, I went home and set up 2 binders, one for each one of us, and that's why you all have binders today, because I found that that was one of the most useful things I could do, and I realized there was no guarantee that he was going to die before me, and I needed one for myself as well as having one for him. So I encourage all of you to use this binder, add whatever material to it. Mine has in it a copy of my will, a copy of the durable power of attorney, and this 5 wishes document. And on top of that, also using the information that was in the diocesan document, lists of name, phone numbers of all relevant people, including doctors, dentists, veterinarians, I mean, a whole range of things that somebody might possibly need if I died. I just came back from a trip to Ireland. I could have died in Ireland. And my children know that this binder is on my desk at home, and they would have the information they needed there.
Do you have your list of medications in it?
I have not added my list of medications, so that's a good one. I do update this from time to time. Last time was at the beginning of COVID, because I realized, who knows what's going to happen during COVID. But one of the very key parts of it is this 5 wishes document, and those of you who pre-registered will have a copy of that in the back of your, back of your binder, if you'd like to turn to that now. Those of you who don't have a copy, you can order it online and get a copy, as many copies you want to pay something for a very reasonable price. I don't know we have any left. We ordered 50, but anyway. So this document was put together by someone named Jim Cowie, who worked closely with Mother Teresa, and for a year he lived in a hospice that she ran here in Washington, D.C. And he was inspired by this experience to find a way for patients and their families to plan ahead and to cope with serious illness. And this document now is available and used throughout the country. 42 of the 50 states in the U.S. Recognize this and honor it. There are a few cases where you need to have it notarized, but in most cases, all you need are 2 witnesses. You need to sign it in front of 2 witnesses. So it's very easy to do, and if you decide to change things, you can easily change things. So if you will turn to wish number 1, which is on page 4, the very first page is dealing with the person I want to make healthcare decisions for me, but I can't make them for myself. And if you haven't yet thought about this is a very, very important decision to make and to have in writing. You can change it if you change your mind over time, but having here the information on who you want to make the decisions if you're unable to do it. My preference, personally, would be my daughter, who's very understanding about these things. She lives in Germany. So my son lives here in the state of Virginia. So I have him as the number 1 person in conjunction, in consultation with my daughter who is overseas. So you need to think through who this should be. And on the page 5, the page across from that, there are a whole list of things that a healthcare agent, as they call this person, can do. And if you don't want them to have this ability, you cross it out. And if you have additional things you want them to do, there's some empty lines and you just write them in. So this is, you're deciding who's going to make the decisions and how much power you want them to have. So that is super important. And the second page deals with the things that Jackie has just been talking about. Wish number 2 is my wish for the kind of medical treatment I want or don't want. And again, you can add to this, subtract from it, however you want. But it talks about life support treatment. What does that mean to you? And what do you want or not want? And when you are close to death, what is it that you would like to have? They have 3 choices. I want to have life support treatment. I do not want life support treatment. If it's been started, I want it stopped. And number 3, I want to have life support treatment if my doctor believes it could help, but I want my doctor to stop giving me it if it does not help my health condition or symptoms. So, you have those 3 choices. And then again, if you're in a coma, or if you have severe brain damage and other conditions. So this gives you a chance to write down the various things that Jackie's been talking about, what you want and don't want for yourself. And then the final 3 wishes are more personal, spiritual, emotional wishes. How comfortable do you want to be? How do you, is the main thing I don't want to be in pain? Well, that's one of the things that's listed. If that's not important to you, cross it off. I wish to have a cool, moist cloth put on my head if I have a fever. I mean, they give a whole bunch of examples that you can decide whether that's part of what you want in terms of being comfortable towards the end of your life. My wish for how I want people to treat me. I wish to have people with me. Well, some introverts might not want people with me. So, you can decide. I wish to have my hand held. I want people by my side praying. There may be some people who aren't comfortable with that. For others, it can be a huge comfort. Having this down in writing, this is a document that expresses your desires in all these areas. And the final wish 5 is what I want my loved ones to know. And again, you can cross out anything that doesn't apply. I want them to know I love them. I wish to be forgiven for the times I've hurt them. I wish to have my family and others know that I forgive them when they hurt me, and so on. And at the end of that list, there is my body should be put in the following location. For me, it was the Holy Comforter Columbarium. So that's written here. And the following person knows my funeral wishes. And again, clergy here is what I put down. So you can express all this. So if you go home and you have a car accident, you don't make it home, it's all spelled out for those you leave behind. And that is such a gift. When you don't have this information spelled out, they have to make the decisions of the type that Jackie was talking about and everything else. And this way, it is all spelled out. And then on page 10, you sign the form with 2 witnesses. Mine is notarized because I was having my will redone at the time, so they went ahead and notarized it. You don't have to. But this is, for me, it was a great comfort. I scanned it, and my children both have a copy, scanned copy. I'm with Kaiser Permanente, and they also have a copy. They have their own booklet, which is called Life Care Planning. If any of you are Kaiser patients, you may have seen this. It's very similar, and maybe other medical facilities do as well. But this gives you, control freaks like me like to know that I have at least a tiny bit of control, looking forward and going towards the end of my life. So what we would like to suggest that you do is, those of you who plan to be here next week, take a first shot at filling some of this out, going through it, see if you have any questions. And next week will be a lot of practical stuff, and there will be more things that you can do after that. But for now, this is the first one to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma. And thank you, Jackie.
That was really helpful for everybody. Jim.
Just, I've carried this through my whole life. I've carried this with me my whole life since I was probably 10 years old. My grandfather was living with his daughter, my mother, and obviously her husband, my father, in his later years. And he always said the Lord's Prayer every night before he went to sleep. And one night, my parents heard him get up and use the restroom. went back to bed and said, okay, God, I'm ready, come get me. My parents got up out of bed, went into his room, and he had passed. And I carried that as a sign of hope. Basically, easy it is to just say, okay, I'm ready, come and get me.
Easy for some. With our advanced options now, you get into much more complicated territory. This is part of the deal of where we are. I have one of my closest friends who is exactly my age, was in a horrible car accident. Her C2 was severed. She coded twice at the scene of the accident. They brought her back twice. She is, I mean, all of these things that we talked about actually kept her alive. She was in 2 comas. She's now home by the grace of God and her own will. And she is, mostly paralyzed, but starting to come back. And anyway, so we are very fortunate to have the option of these things. The problem is when we get into situations where they are prolonging states that we don't want to be in. And wow, is it so hard. I cannot tell you, even with all the documents in place, if you're not there or somehow it's not in your chart, so it's just something you have to be vigilant about. I'm thrilled to see so many of you. This is great. We have 2 more sessions, and there's more coming for your binders that we couldn't quite put together. So even if you aren't here, please let us know, and we'll make sure that we have a copy of it for you. We will have an updated set of funeral guidelines here at Holy Comforter, which hadn't been looked at for a very long time, and things have changed. And one of the things that's not in any of the funeral guidelines that I've looked at, but really needs to be, is make sure your passwords are somewhere your person can find them, not on a wacky piece of paper like my husband where you can barely read his writing and it's really old. Anyway, so next week, logistics around the actual legal stuff around this, and then the following week we will talk about end-of-life spirituality and planning your funeral, and you will be given a guidebook and a form to actually fill out if you want. And I will say that your loved ones will be so grateful that you have planned your funeral. It is an incredible gift you can give to your children. So, go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Talking of passwords.
Where'd you buy that notebook?